Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. So we shall continue with the chapter the diuretic drugs. So in part 1 we had discussed the relevant physiology of the urine formation, in which we had discussed about the sites, the different sites at which these diuretic drugs can act. So for convenience, all the tubular structure, the renal tubules, has been divided into 4 sites, and at these sites the respective transporters which are inhibited by the diuretic drugs we have discussed in detail, how they transport the ions across the membrane. So basically we have focused on the reabsorption of the sodium ions, because we have seen the diuretic drugs are those which will prevent the reabsorption of this sodium ion, so that the excretion of the sodium ions is promoted, and that's how the diuretic drugs will lead to excretion of the water as well along with it, and that's how the edema will be relieved. And for the same reason, it has also been popularly used in the conditions like hypertension. Okay, because in hypertension we know that the fluid, okay, that is the fluid amount, if it is more, obviously the blood volume also will be more in the body. So when the blood volume is high, obviously how it relates to the blood pressure, when the blood volume is high, obviously the blood pressure will also be high. Okay, so by reducing the blood volume in hypertensive patients, the BP can be reduced with the help of using the diuretic drugs. So that's why these particular drugs popularity has increased when it was found to be very much effective in the treatment of hypertension. Okay, so as we have discussed earlier, diuretics, what is the definition of diuretics? Or these are also known as natriuretics. Natriuretics meaning it causes the loss of sodium ions from the body. Natrium is the name of sodium, right? Sodium atom. So natriuretics are those which will promote the loss of sodium in the urine. Whereas diuretics, these are the drugs which cause a net loss of sodium and water in the urine. So that's how they will relieve the edema. So earlier it was very popularly used in the relieving of the condition of edema. But since it has been discovered to be useful in the hypertension, these are one of the most widely prescribed drugs. Okay. So coming to the classification. So in today's lecture we shall discuss the classification of the various diuretic drugs, and we shall consider the first class in detail, that is the high efficacy diuretics, or these are also known as high ceiling diuretics or loop diuretics, or the inhibitors of sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transport. Okay. So coming to the first class, that is the high efficacy diuretic. So the subclass over here is the sulfoamide derivatives. Examples include furosemide, this is also known as furosemide, bumetanide, and torazamide or torzamide also it is known as. Okay, so these are the 3 drugs belonging to the high ceiling diuretic class. And the second class is the medium efficacy diuretics. These are also known as inhibitors of sodium chloride symport. So the classification, it depends upon which is a transporter which is inhibited by these particular drugs. Okay, so here the medium efficacy diuretics, these inhibit which transporter? It is sodium chloride symport, which is located at site 3. If you all can recall the relevant physiology of urine formation, in which we had discussed the different transporters. Okay, so basically this classification, as we have seen, that it depends upon mainly the efficacy, high efficacy or high ceiling diuretics, medium efficacy diuretics, and weak or adjunctive diuretics, because under renal physiology also we have seen, depending upon the site, the efficacy to inhibit the sodium reabsorption also vary, right? Okay, So medium efficacy diuretics would be those which are acting at site 3, right? So here again there are two subclassifications. Benzothiazidines, these are also popularly called as thiazides, and there are 4 examples over here: hydrochlorothiazide, benzthiazide, hydroflumethiazide, bentoflumethiazide. Okay. Second subclass is thiazide-like, that is related heterocyclic. So there is a change in the heterocyclic ring over here. So examples over here include chlorthalidone, metolazone, zipamide, indapamide and clopamide. Then the third class, obviously it is the weak or adjunctive diuretics. So these are the diuretics which act as site 4 and to certain extent it at site 1 as well. Okay, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, these are the ones which act as site 1. Okay, so first subclass is carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Remember the significance of this enzyme? Yes, it's in the formation of the carbonic acid, right? H plus and bicarbonate combines to form carbonic acid, which splits into water and carbon dioxide, which is getting reabsorbed into your tubular cells inside, and again this carbonic acid is formed within the cell itself also in the presence of this particular enzyme. Okay, so this enzyme is the target of acetazolamide. Okay. Then the second subclass under weak diuretics is potassium sparing diuretics. So we have seen in the later parts that the potassium excretion is increased, right? So to prevent that potassium excretion, this particular class was developed to prevent a complication which may be produced by the high ceiling and the thiazide type of diuretics. So to prevent that, this particular class was developed. So again over here there are two subclassifications. Aldosterone antagonists, we have seen the significance of aldosterone as well in the introduction, how the reabsorption of sodium is dependent on the aldosterone. There are two examples, spironolactone and eplerenone. Second subclass of potassium sparing diuretics is inhibitors of the renal epithelial sodium channel. Examples are triamterene and amiloride. And the third subclass of the weak diuretics is osmotic diuretics. So here examples are mannitol, isosorbide and glycerol. So let us come to the detailed explanation of each of the drugs. Okay, so coming to the first class under the diuretic drugs, that is the high ceiling diuretics, or these are also called as loop diuretics, or these are also known as inhibitors of sodium potassium 2 chloride cotransport. Okay, so we have seen that there are 3 examples. So the first one which we will consider is the furosemide. This is also known as furosemide. Both are correct. So here it is discussed as a prototype drug. Out of the 3, this was the first of its kind which was discovered. Okay, so this particular drug, when it was developed, it was found to be highly efficacious, and the discovery was a breakthrough because the diuretic action or the natriuretic effect which was produced by this particular drug was the maximum when you compare it with all the other classes or all the other examples. Maximum diuretic effect was produced by this particular agent. And not only that, this diuretic effect was also increasing as you increase the dose. Okay, so it produces the dose dependent action. So as you increase the dose, the diuretic response also increases. That is, the urine output also increases as you increase the dose of this drug. So round about 10 liters of urine may be produced in a day. What is a normal volume of urine which is produced in 24 hours? In the introduction we have seen it's 1.5 liters, right? So out of the filtrate, just 1% is converted to urine. It forms urine, and rest of the 99% is reabsorbed, right? So by inhibiting this reabsorption process, this urine output which is normally 1.5 liters, it is increased round up to 10 liters. So you can imagine the efficacy of this particular drug, right? And one more advantage is that it is even active in those patients who have severe renal failure as well. So in such individuals also this particular drug is quite effective. Then coming to the onset of action, this is quite quick. As you can see, if you inject it by IV route, it will act just within 2 to 5 minutes. It will start increasing the urine output. Intramuscular, obviously, it will take a little bit more time, because here you are placing it directly into your bloodstreams, but here you are placing it in the vicinity, right? So it will take a little bit more time. 10 to 20 minutes time is required. Whereas oral, it will take a little more time. That is 20 to 40 minutes are required for it to produce its action, start producing its action. That is onset of action. And duration, it is quite short. That is 3 to 6 hours. Then coming to the mechanism of action. Now this is quite important even from exam point of view. Of course, this class is also important from exam point of view. Mechanism is also asked many times in the papers. Okay. What is the mechanism of action of the high saline diuretics or furosemide, to be more specific? Okay. So as we have seen in the introduction, that these drugs inhibit the transporter sodium potassium 2-chloride co-transport. Now remember this particular figure which we had seen in the introduction? Yes, this is the transporter which is inhibited by the high ceiling diuretics. Okay, so what is the site? It acts at site 2. And what is site 2? Site 2 is the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, right? That's why these particular drugs are also referred to as loop diuretics, because they act on loop of Henle. Okay, so that is the reason why these are also known as loop diuretics. Okay, now how it reaches its site of action? That's by getting secreted through the organic anion transporters. Remember, we talked about the transporters. So there are specific transporters meant for the release or secretion of the certain substances. So this particular drug, it gets secreted in the PT by the utilization of this organic anion transporters, and then it will reach the ascending limb of loop of Henle, and it will act from the luminal side of the membrane. Okay, so it will be released over here, somewhere over here. So transporter is located over here. It will utilize and get released over here. Okay, so this is how it will enter the tubules, and from here along with the filtrate it will be transmitted to its site of action. So this is how it will reach its site of action. Okay, and it will act from which side? It will act from the luminal side. So if this is a transporter, it will act on this transporter from the luminal side. So to make this more clearer, we'll have a look at the detailed structure of the individual cell. Remember, in the introduction also we had taken up this particular image. Okay, so this is your one representative cell which is present in this particular lining, right? The tubular lining, it comprises of a single layer of different types of cells, right? The types of cells, it changes as you move further along the tubules, right? So this is one representative cell which is shown over here. This is the luminal membrane. So this is the lumen of your tubule. So here there will be one more cell, okay, attached to this. So likewise a number of cells will be present. Here there will be one more cell, right? Okay, so this is one of the cell which is shown, and where exactly this transporter is located? It's located on the luminal membrane, the membrane which is facing the lumen of your tubule, right? And the wall which is present on the opposite side, it is known as the basolateral membrane, which is facing your ECF, right? So this is the lumen of your tubule, and this is the ECF. So in which direction absorption of sodium will take place? As we have seen in the introduction as well, sodium, it will enter into the cell by the help of this particular transporter inside 2, that is sodium potassium 2-chloride co-transport. So along with sodium, 2 other ions are also moving, right? 1 sodium, 1 potassium, and 2 of the chloride ions are entering. So a stoichiometric entry of the ions is taking place. So further from here, the sodium gets reabsorbed into the ECF, right? So it moves to the ECF with the help of the sodium potassium ATPase. So we have seen that by whatever mechanism sodium enters into the cell, it will be pushed into the ECF with the help of the sodium potassium ATPase. So it's an active transport and requiring an energy, right? ATP molecule will be hydrolyzed over here. Okay, so this is how the entry of the sodium will take place. Now this co-transporter, it has been studied in detail and it is found to be a glycoprotein. It has 12 membrane spanning domains. That is, it will be a protein, right? So it will have 12 membrane spanning domains. Okay, so in this fashion. Okay, if you all can recall the receptors part when we had discussed, okay, in the basic pharmacology. Okay, so this particular transporter, it has 12 membrane spanning domains. Okay, now this transporter, it performs both the functions. Okay, remember under the transporters we had discussed in the introduction that the transporters, it can be a secretory as well as absorbing transporter. That means it may even move the ion in this direction or it may move the ion in the opposite direction. So this one will have an absorbing function and this transporter, it will have a secretory function. So both type of transporters are present over here. Okay, so this transporter, co-transporter, sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transporter, this is acting as both a secretory as well as absorptive transport. Okay, so whatever the mechanism over here, the furosemide, it will inhibit the transporter which is acting as a absorptive transporter, right? So this particular type of transporter is inhibited. So because of this, the corticomedullary osmotic gradient will be abolished, right? So sodium will not be absorbed over here, it will not be absorbed. So obviously the corticomedullary osmotic gradient will be abolished and that's how it will block both the positive as well as negative free water clearance. Okay. Now, as we have seen that the transporter has both the functions, right? Absorptive as well as secretory isoform. So, absorptive transporters, these are mainly located over here on the luminal membrane, and the secretory ones, these are located on the basolateral membrane. Okay, now this furosemide, it acts from the luminal side and it mainly binds with the chloride binding site. Okay, so it attaches itself to the chloride binding site and it will inhibit the transport function of this transporter. That's how the sodium reabsorption will not take place. Okay, so this transporter is inhibited. As a result of this, movement of all these three ions will stop. So it will increase the excretion of sodium ions along with the chloride also and the potassium ions as well. Okay, so this to do with the mechanism of action. Then coming to the action. So what are the different actions which are produced by this particular drug? Not only on the renal tubules but on the other systems as well. Okay, so mostly it is the effects on the renal system which is produced. Okay, so first action is the potassium excretion is increased. Okay, so potassium excretion is increased by these particular drugs. Now why it is increasing the potassium excretion? That's because it increases the sodium load which is reaching the distal tubule. Remember the renal physiology. In distal tubule, sodium is exchanged with potassium, right? Sodium potassium antiporter is located. Okay, so more of sodium will be reabsorbed and in exchange to that, what will be excreted? Yes, it will be the potassium which is excreted, right? So it will increase the potassium excretion. So potassium loss from the body will be increased. So what is a condition known as when potassium levels of the body is decreased? Yes, it will produce hypokalemia. kalemia, right? So this is the condition which may be precipitated. However, this particular loss of potassium, it is less than thiazide. Thiazide also have same action, and when you compare the high ceiling diuretics with the thiazides, the loss of the potassium, it is comparatively less when you compare it with the thiazides. Okay, excretion of potassium by the thiazides. Okay, then furosemide also has weak carbonic anhydrase inhibitory action. Okay, so because of this, it will also increase the bicarbonate excretion as well, right? Because carbonic anhydrase, what is the function? It combines this bicarbonate with the H plus ion, and further carbonic acid is split into the H2O, right? So combination of these two will result in formation of carbonic acid, right? H2CO3, and further it will be split into H2O and CO2. So this step will be inhibited. As a result of this, the reabsorption of these two will be inhibited. So what will happen? Ultimately the bicarbonate will be excreted out. That's what we have seen in the introduction in the last lecture as well. Okay. So urinary pH, what will happen to it? It may rise. Okay, but bicarbonate is not the main ion. It is the chloride which is the main anion which is excreted. Okay. So though it increases the loss of bicarbonate from the body, still acidosis will not be produced. Okay, whereas at high doses sometimes mild alkalosis may be precipitated. Okay, then apart from that, furosemide also causes the acute changes in the renal and systemic hemodynamics as well. It's a blood flow, it may be altered. After 5 minutes of IV injection, renal blood flow, it may transiently be increased. Okay, so there is a redistribution of blood flow as well from the outer region to the mid-cortical zone of the kidney. Okay, GFR generally, when the blood flow to the kidney alters, GFR should actually be altered, but it remains unaltered because homeostatic or compensatory mechanisms will come into picture, and there won't be any alterations in the GFR as such. Okay, so that will be taken up by the, or that will be taken care of by the compensatory mechanisms which come into picture. Okay, then another action is alterations in the pressure relationships between the vascular, interstitial and tubular compartments. So as a result of alterations in the flow, the pressure relationships, okay, as compared to each other, the pressures will be altered. So net result of these alterations in the pressures will be decrease in the PT reabsorption. So reabsorption in the proximal tubules will also be altered. Apart from that, increase in the local PG synthesis will be produced. So this in turn will alter the intrarenal hemodynamics. Okay, so blood flow in the regions within the kidneys will be altered. Another action of furosemide is increase in the calcium excretion. So it will promote the calcium excretion from the body. Now one thing you should remember over here is thiazides. Thiazides reduce the excretion of the calcium ions, whereas furosemides increase the excretion of the calcium. Okay. Apart from that, magnesium excretion, this is also increased by both furosemide as well as the thiazides. Okay, so this is one of the important action which may result in complications, that is disturbance in the levels of calcium and the magnesium in the body. Then one more action is that it can raise the blood uric acid levels as well. Now how this is increasing the blood uric acid? Hyperuricemia can be precipitated. Now why it is being produced is because the proximal tubular secretion of this uric acid, it is affected. Uric acid normally is excreted by using certain transporters which are located in the proximal tubules. Okay, so remember in the mechanism of action we have seen that furosemide, it is secreted by utilizing the transporters in the PT, and then it will reach its site of action, right? So these are the transporters which are utilized by the uric acid as well. So both are using the same transporter to get secreted into the tubules, right? So in these tubules, same transporter is utilized for uric acid as well as furosemide. Okay, so what will happen? There will be competition between these two for the same transporter, right? So instead of uric acid, furosemide will get secreted over here. So what will happen to this uric acid? Obviously, its secretion will get inhibited and levels of uric acid in the body will increase. So also, it will increase the reabsorption of the uric acid in the proximal tubule as well. So obviously, its secretion is getting inhibited and uric acid reabsorption is getting increased. So what will happen? Ultimately, the levels of uric acid in the blood, it will get increased. So hyperuricemia is one of the complications which can be produced. Okay, however, it is lower. The magnitude of production of this hyperuricemia is less as compared to the thiazides. Then coming to the pharmacokinetics. Furosemide, it is rapidly absorbed orally, but bioavailability is less. That is just 60%. So the parenteral route may be preferred over the oral route because the bioavailability is less. Okay. Now, if the patient is suffering from severe CHF, oral bioavailability, it may be markedly reduced. So, you may have to switch over to the parenteral administration. Lipid solubility of this drug is low. Okay, so its chances of reabsorption in the kidney tubules is low. So, that will help it to reach its site and it will act on the luminal side. Also, plasma protein binding, it's quite high, so it is highly plasma protein bound drug. Coming to the metabolism part, it is partly conjugated with glucuronic acid. Okay, so it's a type of phase 2 reaction, right? An important phase 2 reaction, glucuronide conjugation. Okay, so partly conjugated with glucuronic acid and mainly it is excreted in the unchanged form. It is not metabolic. Most of it will get excreted out as such, okay, by the glomerular filtration as well as the tubular secretion. Some amount is also excreted in the bile and directly it may get secreted into the intestine, so that it will get excreted out of the body through the feces as well. Then coming to the plasma T half-life, it is around about 1 to 2 hours. Okay, but in case if the patient is suffering from pulmonary edema, renal or hepatic insufficiency, this plasma T half-life may be prolonged. So this is to do with the furosemide. Coming to the second drug, that is bumetanide. So this particular drug, it is similar to furosemide in all the respects except the potency. As you can see over here, it is 40 times more potent as compared to furosemide. So what you can conclude, of 40 times less dose will be required of bumetanide to produce the same degree of diuretic action. Okay, whereas this particular drug also induces the diuresis very rapidly and it is highly effective as well in case of pulmonary edema. Rest all properties such as site of action, sealing effect, renal hemodynamic changes, duration of action, all are similar to that of furosemide. Apart from that, it can also produce a secondary effect in the proximal tubules as well, apart from acting on the site too. Okay, now this particular drug, it is preferred in mainly those cases which are not responding to furosemide, okay, or in such individuals who may not tolerate the furosemide, okay, due to some allergic reactions which may be precipitated. Okay. Even one more advantage is that hyperuricemia, potassium loss, glucose intolerance and autotoxicity. This particular drug has one complication, autotoxicity, okay, high ceiling diuretics. So we will discuss these complications in detail in the next lecture together for thiazides as well as high ceiling diuretics. But keep in mind that all these effects, these are less marked with the use of bumetanide as compared to furosemide. Okay. However, this drug may cause myopathy. Okay. The muscles may get affected. Then one more difference with the furosemide, it is more lipid soluble. We have seen in case of furosemide, lipid solubility is low. Again, one more difference is in the bioavailability. With furosemide, the oral bioavailability was just 60%, right? But over here it is more, 80 to 100% bioavailability, right? So it is quite effective by oral route as well. Now this property is same. Plasma protein binding, yes. Furosemide was also highly plasma protein bound. Even this one is also highly plasma protein bound. Then partly metabolized and partially excreted in the unchanged form in the urine. And the T half-life is also different. Over here it is just 60 minutes. And in case of renal or hepatic insufficiency, it may get prolonged. Then the third drug is torazamide, or it is also known as torsemide. This is another high ceiling diuretics. Again, over here the properties are similar to that of furosemide, but it is 3 times more potent than furosemide. Bumetanide was 40 times more potent, but this one is just 3 times more potent. Okay, so 3 times less dose will be required with this particular drug. Okay, whereas oral absorption, it is more rapid and complete. T half-life is 3.5 hours, so it is quite long as compared to furosemide. Even the duration of action, you can see that it is longer with this particular agent. So uses, obviously it will be edema and in the hypertension. So this is to do with the individual drugs belonging to high ceiling diuretics or loop diuretics. Now coming to the uses of these high ceiling diuretics. Which are the situations in which these drugs are preferred? First and the foremost use for which it was introduced was edema. Okay, so edema, irrespective of the etiology, whatever cause it may be, edema will be relieved because it causes the loss of sodium ions, and along with it water will also be lost, right? So fluids from the body will be lost. So edema will be quickly relieved. May it be cardiac edema, hepatic edema or renal edema. Whatever cause may be, it will be relieved. Okay. So these particular agents, high ceiling diuretics, these are preferred in case of CHF as well, congestive heart failure, to mobilize the edema fluid. Okay. Now usually thiazides, these may be preferred for the maintenance, but then these are found to be ineffective. Mostly high ceiling diuretics are preferred for maintenance as well. Then for the nephrotic and other forms of resistant edema, the high ceiling diuretics are the drug of choice. Okay. Even in case of renal failure, the loop diuretics, they will decrease the need for the dialysis. Usually when there is renal failure or kidney failure, the patient may have to undergo dialysis, right? So the use of these or the need for dialysis will also be decreased with the use of these high ceiling diuretics. Next use is acute pulmonary edema or acute left ventricular failure following the myocardial infarction. Okay, so over here the intravenous administration of furosemide or its congener may produce the relief in this particular situation. Now how they will relieve? That's by producing the vasodilatory action. Remember the hemodynamic changes are produced by these diuretics. Okay, so vasodilatory actions will be produced, so the load on the heart will be reduced, and that's how the congestion also will be relieved, right? So that this vasodilatory action precedes the saliuretic action, right? So saliuretic property. It causes a loss of sodium chloride, right? So this will also result in reduction in the fluid load, and that's how it will relieve this condition. Next use is cerebral edema. Okay, now over here generally osmotic diuretics are primarily used, but furosemides may also be combined to improve the efficiency of these osmotic diuretics. Next use is of course hypertension, for which these are one of the first line treatment. Okay, so high ceiling diuretics, these are generally preferred in case of renal insufficiency. Remember, these drugs are even effective in case of renal failure, right, or congestive heart failure, or in case of resistant cases or hypertensive emergencies. Okay, so these are the situations wherein you should go for the high ceiling diuretics. Then another use is after the blood transfusion. So along with the blood transfusion, if the patient is suffering from severe anemia, you might have to go for blood transfusion. So at that time you will be loading your patient's body with the fluid, right? So to prevent that vascular overload, these diuretics may be infused along with the hypertonic saline, sorry. Okay, so it may be helpful in case of hyponatremia. Okay, hyponatremia is the condition wherein the sodium amount will be low. Now why it is happening over here? That's because the fluid load is increased. Okay, so that's why as compared to the solvent, the amount of sodium over here is low. That's why a condition called hyponatremia may be precipitated. Okay, then next use is hypercalcemia of malignancy. Now this is a emergency situation with severe volume depletion which may be produced. Okay, so now in this particular situation where there is volume depletion, obviously you may have to go for the IV saline infusion. Okay, so that's a very important measure. But as you can see over here, hypercalcemia, that means what is happening? There is an increase in the amount of calcium, right? So to relieve that, the furosemide or high saline diuretics may be given. Remember in the actions we have seen that potassium excretion is increased by furosemide, right? So this hypercalcemia, this condition will be relieved, and it also prevents the volume overload as well. Okay, so this are the uses of the high saline diuretic. So with this we have completed the classification, and the first class, that is the high saline diuretics or the loop diuretics or the inhibitors of sodium potassium 2 chloride cotransporter. Okay, so this is the reference for my presentation. Thank you for watching.